Welcome to Finlos Loves. Thanks for joining us for the second part of this episode about the art of the fuck up. Let's get back to the conversation between Eva and me. I think that most people, as a general rule, don't want to do harm. And I think that when we realize that we do harm others, I think the embarrassment and the shame, I think that those are real.
Yeah, well, because we haven't talked. I love that you mentioned the nasty, by the way. Like, I don't know if you were meaning to reference Gottman or not, but you kind of did. And I mean, he's got the whole book about like repair and like anger and like, you know, how to repair after there's been betrayal. So that's part of the connection. But I think you're getting into also what gets in the way of accountability, right? And you've mentioned shame like several times, which I think is a part of it. You know, shame spiraling, because when you shame spiral, you are very much making it about you, right? But here was the connection with Gottman, is that those moments can serve as what he calls sliding glass door moments, right? Where you can, if you see the storm clouds, you can ignore them. If you really want to, you can ignore them. But the rains are coming. Right? The rain's going to be there. And, you know, and so you might find yourself outside without an umbrella or you might just ignore that the rain's there and not put away the barbecue or whatever. Like, I don't know how far to take this metaphor, but the point is that it doesn't change the fact that it's there. It's what you do with it, right? Like, do you have enough time to address it in a way that creates a cushion for it, that creates a container for it, that builds intimacy and makes you feel closer to that person, and in a space where the person feels like truly heard, understood, valued, you know, even more so if you're the one to kind of name it, right? Like if you're like, you know, you seem sad and I'm curious if it has to do with this, because then how beautiful is that for you to be doing the work of accountability even in that moment, like, and how validating for that individual to feel like, oh, you remembered why this might be a painful time, as opposed to you just done forgotten it, and it's something that, you know, still hurts me, that I still carry, that I still walk with, even though I didn't do that shitty thing. It was the shitty thing that was done to me, right? I wasn't responsible for it, but I still carry the wound of it in some way, because then that feels very lonely, and it feels like, well, what's the point? Why are you here? Like, if you don't want to be the kind of person that I can turn to with my hurt, even when that hurt was something that you caused, right? You know, and because it also builds empathy for the reasons that we didn't have the tools. I think that we're a lot more willing to have empathy for the ways that we may have contributed to the conditions that led up to, or even if we didn't contribute, you know, and I think we always do in some way, that we can at least have empathy for the situation that evolved around the conditions that were set in motion, with, you know, whether it be some of those societal issues that we already talked about, our own upbringing, you know, and the intense and immense fear of sort of being left alone, you know, with our pain and sort of abandoned to it, you know, especially when it's a relationship that's become one that's very formative in our lives. And so I think we have the we talked about the shame spiraling as one of the factors that gets in the way of accountability, but I think that there are a couple others. I think the definitely the lack of listening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like there are people who hear you, but they don't really hear you, right? It's like, are you listen? You know, are you like, you might hear me as in, you know that the sound is coming out of my out of my mouth, and it is vibrating your eardrums, and you know the actual physical experience of sound is there. But if you're so checked out, if you're so disconnected and disembodied in those moments, you know, and that's a real thing. That's like if one of the nervous system like activation points is disassociation, right? It's like sort of like out of body experience, freeze. And if you're in that state, then you're not actually hearing me. You're not actually listening to me. And you know, for a lot of people that feels really painful not to be heard in that way. And so like, what needs to happen? And you know, if that's something that you need to ask for in that moment, like we know that especially people who, and this actually does unfortunately line up with more of the biology around the reactivity of male biology, like the way, I don't know, I can't, you know, go read about it, but like it the 20 minutes that are required for people to calm down from that state, like it's something real. Mm-hmm. You know, and so if that's what needs to happen, is like, can you, when you're not in the middle of these situations, ask for that so that you're able to come back to it in a place of lack of defensiveness, because that takes maturity too, right? Like creating plans around how are we going to communicate about these mistakes as we're making them is important, and it's a skill, just like accountability is a skill that we have to build when we don't have any real experience with it. And then I think maybe like, I'm sure that there are more than like 3, but like the other one is nobody wants to be wrong. Mm. Because we've gotten accustomed and acculturated to this idea that if I'm not right, therefore I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, then I'm the loser. Mm-hmm. You know, and I'm sure it's not going to be the loser, right? It's, you know, and so it's almost preferable to play victim in some way.
Yeah.
To be the victim, which is that poor me thing that you mentioned at the beginning.
And I think it might be, I'm trying to think of why the fuck up is such a toxic, destructive trope to engage in, and ultimately because it's a tool of manipulation.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you as opposed to saying I'm not wrong, it becomes I'm always wrong. I can't do anything right. Nothing I ever do is good enough. And so you're reinforcing that narrative of insecurity and shame and weakness, right? Because the fuck up can never be right, or else that narrative gets interrupted. It becomes a system of perpetually goal shifting, because if they ever actually make any sort of progress, then that challenges the narrative of what the fuck up is. The fuck up can never do right, or they can only do right to the point that it makes the precipice so much more dangerous to fall from. Right, that's the whole point of it, is that you're steadily building up to that inevitable moment when you self-destruct, because that's what has to happen. That is the cycle. That is the narrative, and it becomes a tool of manipulation. It becomes a cry for, if you don't help me, I'm just gonna fall off this cliff again.
Oh man, That's like some codependent stuff right there.
That's exactly what it becomes.
Yeah.
Because then the person who's receiving the harm becomes the one who has to care for the one
Yes.
doing the harm.
Yeah. That's yeah. Those are some codependent, like, and very problematic. And yeah, there's definitely this. I think, you know, it's no secret that definitely, right, like, cultural dynamics dictate that, by and large, men are not held accountable for a lot of their behavior, and by and large, white people are not held accountable for their racist behavior, and you know, people who don't live with disabilities aren't held for the ways that they make it very difficult for people with living with disabilities have to function in the world or not function. You know, it's like I hate, you know, I hate all of this. I hate that we could do better. We have the means, have the ability, and yet we don't. And so much of it is just centered around the yeah, I'm right, you're wrong narrative, right? And Dr. Brado used to talk about too about the fact that about 95% of car accidents were because of the same thing, that it was one person who could have avoided an accident but was like, no, I have the right of way. I have the right of way.
Yep.
And, you know, and I don't know. I don't, you know, and I think that what it boils down to is what people want to know. What's the incentive, right? What's the incentive for being wrong, for admitting that I did a bad thing? Because generally what happens when, or at least this is what we're taught, right? If we do a bad thing, we're punished.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, what happened is that I realized that I was punished no matter whether I did a bad thing or a good thing. Right? And so I think I had to learn that, like, something did not make sense in that scenario, right? That there was such a thing as being in right relation to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't entirely sure what that was going to look like. I wasn't entirely sure, but I what I did know is this is not it. This doesn't feel right, right? And so some of that, like, it's even early on, like some of that intuition. And, you know, I had it coming at me from, I think, from all angles, right? Like I had it coming at me from, like, religion, telling me what I could be and could not be. That didn't feel right. You know, I had just like really sexist notions, like from family members about even like women's ability to keep keep information confidential and stuff like that, where, like, you know, women were seen as like gossipy and problematic. And it's like, yeah, okay, cool, like maybe that's kind of how you make us out to be. Maybe that's where we draw our power, because all other forms of power are stripped from us. Like, and so, you know, the art of el chisme is a real thing, right? Like, you know, como chismeando, or gossip as a means of power in society. And so I guess the question is, like, how do we make it sexier or better to do the right thing? And I mean, I can give the answer that I think makes sense for me, and, you know, and then people need to figure out what makes sense for them too. So the question is, you know, for most of our lives, our experience of the world is that if we do something wrong, right? And you talked about this too, like, we get really good at like at lying about what we've done so that we can avoid getting in trouble, or just not talking about it at all so that we don't get in trouble, right? But there's always this sort of underlying current of, we're going to get in trouble, we're going to be punished, you know, however that looks like for you. It might be getting yelled at, it might mean having to face the disappointment of someone, It might mean the end of a relationship. It may mean, and so then what is, for me, like, I think courage looks differently for different people. But for me, like, yes, courageousness, I like to reward courageousness. A person who's brave is, for me, very sexy, right? Like, so if somebody is willing to tell me something that feels really scary for them, I immediately, I think, feel more tender and more willing to make space for them in a way that I might not have had they just been deflective and defensive. And I think that that's what we didn't get as kids. We didn't get the opportunity to mess up and to say to have somebody say to us, it's okay, you get to try again. Here's some feedback about why this might have gone wrong for you. And and the important thing is that you didn't try to hide it, you didn't try to lie about it, you just told us.
Ultimately, what we're afraid of is the ending of something.
Mm-hmm.
It stems all the way back from the beginning, where if I fuck up with my parents are not going to love me anymore. And then, that puts at risk all of the hierarchy of needs right from the beginning. So we fall into the habits of people pleasing,
mm-hmm.
and of saying and doing the things that we think other people want or need us to do, which invariably fails because you're making presumptions and you're making assumptions and you're trying to anticipate, and all of those are the home of anxiety, which we all deal with in one way or another, which is it's the space between, thank you therapy, the space between the space between what you know to be happening right now and what you're expecting to happen in the next moment, which will almost always be wrong. That's what anxiety is. But you can't do that for people. You can't always operate under the motivation of anticipation, because people are organic and are constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I think the motivator for the opposite of what you're talking about is the fear of the loss, right? So if I fuck up and I avoid it, then the sick, stupid logic in my brain is I avoid the risk of this ending, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because my fear is that if I tell you that I fucked up, if I tell you that I invested the money poorly, or that I made some really dumb decisions, or whatever it may be,
mm-hmm.
that you're never going to forgive me, that
mm-hmm.
this is an irreparable harm, and that's it, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
And that, more than anything, I think is a paralyzing fear for a lot of people, myself
mm-hmm.
included, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think embracing it sounds so stupid, the unknown, embracing that, no, I can't predict how you're going to take or hear the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to the truth, and then to trust you to take the truth that I'm telling you and do with it what will bring you the most safety or the most security.
Mm-hmm.
And if that means that the nature of this relationship has
mm-hmm.
to change, and this is one of those aha moments, is that relationships change over time. They don't have to end.
Yeah.
The boundaries might shift, and then maybe they'll shift back later.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they will be better. Maybe they'll be different. It doesn't matter. But the point is that what I do by not telling you the truth is I remove your right to decide.
Yes.
I remove your ability to make a conscious choice in what is best for you.
Right.
And in so doing, repeating the harm and making it worse.
Like that's a betrayal. That itself is a betrayal, right? And I
but
think
it's a magnifier, it's a multiplier of the betrayal, because not only did I do the thing, then I didn't tell you about the thing, and so you can't make the best choice. And then no matter what happens, you're gonna find out eventually.
Yeah, especially if you're me. I pick out sus behavior like nobody's business. Yeah.
It's true.
It is true, though.
It's true.
It is. Yeah, and I think, if we take this from the micro to the macro a little bit, right? Like right now, like I'm just seeing like left and right how we've got like, we've got all this like state legislature that's going out and is creating harm, and like to me it's mind-boggling how the amount of gaslighting that happened during legislative session around some of these hearings. Mm-hmm. Like the straight up like, no, you're wrong, when like factual evidence was being presented, when alternative situations were being named, and and I look at that and I'm like, yeah, I mean, let's be real. The thing that enables this to be able to happen is this very thing that we're talking about today, is that on the personal level, we don't know how to have conversations with each other that are vulnerable, that admit to harm doing, that give us each the choice for how we want to relate to each other after harm has been committed. We don't trust that people can decide for themselves what's safest for themselves, right? And ultimately, what somebody decides with what I've shared is out of my hands, right? Like if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm doing the ethical thing, if I'm owning up to something that I did, yeah, it sucks. It sucks that the result of that may be that the person might not be able to stay in relationship with me, but at least I'm being honest, and I am giving them that choice, and that is ethical. That's the right thing to do, and maybe they're just not in a place, where they can hold that with as much grace as I wished or hoped or desired, but it is what it is, right? In that moment. And it's still a learning, like it's still a learning point for me in my trajectory, in my evolution.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of the other consequences that come from these patterns, because they're rampant.
Yeah.
They're rampant. But if I'm a person who's constantly lying, we're talking about politicians, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm a person who's constantly blurring the line between what is real and what is false, then how could I ever really trust anybody else to be telling me the truth if everything that I'm saying is a lie? And then there is no communication. There is no true conversation. And the other end of that is if you continuously tell me something that then turns out not to be true, how can I ever trust you?
Yeah.
And that the trust just gets eroded.
Yeah.
And so like I think that it's really hard because untruth is sort of almost the expectation so much of the time. Mm-hmm. And it is becoming acculturated. Mm-hmm. We're talking about policies, and as a teacher or former teacher, the policies are in place to remove a teacher's ability to speak the truth about the history that of the country that we live in and the world that we live in, to speak the truth of the different experiences that different types of people have, to not be able to present myself as a full realized human sharing space in this classroom or wherever I may be, because to do so puts me at risk. Like, that is the intent of those policies, is to remove the ability to speak the truth. And if what you're teaching is not true, or is partially true, or is hiding the truth, then that's exactly what you're teaching young people to both expect. They don't expect their employers to be truthful. They don't expect their professors to be truthful. They don't expect the news to be truthful, because all of these things are now partial or hidden or just straight up lies.
Yeah, it's a mechanism for harm doing.
Yeah, and it's scary, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah. Well, and this is what I guess, we started with it, and I kind of want to circle back to it, or come full circle, I guess, is that we may not have a lot of control over that, and we don't, in this moment, we don't need to, because we need to get really good at the work of accountability, and that doesn't start broad scale, right? There are people whose job it is to hold politicians accountable. They need to do their job, and we need to do our job. And our job, a lot of our job is, if we're parents, is holding ourselves accountable, to our children, right? Like not replicating those systems of power and control with them in these harmful ways, actually listening to them, listening when we do cause harm. Sometimes it's hard to hear when, especially because she's getting older, and she's been very vocal with us times that we've done things that have hurt her feelings, or that she's experienced as unkind. And I sit with that sometimes, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, most of the time I'm just in awe of, like, how brave she is to feel comfortable enough to tell us. And also then there's a part of me that's like, oh my God, if I had ever done something like that, I probably would have gotten, like, punched in the face. And I'm not even kidding. Like the the physical retribution to an act of that magnitude would have put me in direct danger, which is why I would never have, why it took me so long to find my voice, and why it's so important that once I found it, that I didn't stop. That I didn't stop, no matter with whom. And I think that it's, in some ways, I know that version of me would be so proud of this version of me, and that, a part of me, that's me being accountable to myself, right? Because as much as I need to be accountable to other people, I also need to be accountable to me, and to my value system, and to my own beliefs. And I think that's the other piece, is what about when you say that you believe in a thing, right? And then your actions don't align with the thing that you say that you believe, and the kind of cognitive dissonance that creates. It kind of tears a human apart from the inside. And it's really painful to watch. I think as a therapist, it's painful. As a human who's watched family members do it, it's painful. And in those moments, like, you do all you can to support, but you you can't force people to hold themselves accountable. You can be supportive. You can say, I'm going to be, I'm going to be truthful, and I'm going to hold you accountable. And I love you. I don't, you are not a fuck up. You have done some fucked up things, and people don't want to hear that.
Yeah. Just what you just said a few moments ago about being accountable to yourself. It reminds me of, and it's a meme, but it was one that was actually still, I think, pretty potent. And I'm paraphrasing it. You are the person who you as a child really needed. Is that how did that go?
Yeah, the version of you today is the version of you today is the version that you most needed as a child, like, or something like that. Yeah.
Like, you are the person, the version of you now is the person that you needed as a child, or something like that. Yeah. And I think that's it's a good tool to sort of hold yourself accountable, to hold myself accountable. When I think about the things that I would have needed as a child, is the way that I'm behaving and the way that I'm moving in the world right now, would that have helped little me?
Yeah.
Would it have protected or taught little me to be a better person, or to avoid some of the mistakes that I've made, or avoid some of the harm that I eventually caused?
And I think that, even that's like a very limiting and like sort of settler colonial like mindset, because that's still very focused on the self. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll take that and I'll think, is the version of me today the version of me that could have held my father, that could have sat with my father, as he ached, and made it better for him? Is the version of me today the version of me that Galicia and V need, right? Because I think that that's the other mistake that we make. And you talked about this. You mentioned this at the very beginning, right? Like, our parents were so concerned with, like, I don't want a parent like my parent, that they threw out all the things that I think were positive about the ways that their parents parented. Certainly I was parented, at least for a short time, by my grandfather, and he had some decent ways of parenting. And so it's not just us, it's, whatever generation before us, even back to our great grandparents, if we can remember them. I can remember at least one of mine. What will it look like if we do have grandkids? Like, what kind of accountability practices do we want, to be modeling for them down the road?
So we usually like to wrap up these episodes with some sort of pop culture reference as an anchor point, almost, or as an example. Can you think of any examples of good accountability? Like, I can think of 1,000 that you do every single day. But unfortunately, for the audience, they don't get to see you a lot of times.
I'm also trying for it not to be something that we've kind of already talked about. It's a good example of lack of accountability.
Okay.
I'm thinking about, and I hope I won't ruin it for anybody, so I'll say that disclaimer, what do we call it?
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler, yeah, there's spoilers. Spoiler. For folks who are fans of the Owl House.
Okay, Owl House. Yep.
Yeah, Owl House. We just finished. And I think there's some meta stuff to the fact that we're talking about this show too, because there are concerns about why it was canceled to begin with, and some of it has to do with how unapologetically queer the show was. And I am as a person who identifies as queer, both genderqueer and pansexual, the fact that the character came out, was held and loved by her parent, who was parented by an individual in community who was not her parent, so she had kind of like a second mom. It's just such a wholesome show, and I'm so grateful for the shows that our kids are growing up with nowadays. And so it was really it really was disappointing to see it canceled the way it was canceled. But at the end of the show, the big bad guy,
Bellows.
Yeah, Bellows. He's still doing his old song and dance of trying to trick, like simultaneously trick Luth into thinking that like he's not that bad.
Quintessential fuck up. Oh yeah, I messed up this time.
Yeah. But then it's like, but we humans are better.
Yep.
It's like it's like it was so gross. It was so gross. And so Luth, like you have this story arc of like the hero, right? The hero can't be tainted by but you have the secondary characters who like love Luth and have just basically watched Luth die because of this guy. And he says, well, we humans are better than them, and so the owl lady and King step forward and they trample the bad guy until he's completely gone, finally, once and for all. And it was in terms of, I think that when we talk about transformative justice, it sometimes can feel like it's all lights and rainbows and and we all live happily ever after, and we don't really talk about how hard it is and the losses that we experience along the way, and that we aren't all going to make it, because some of us are never going to change. Some of us are never going to admit that we were wrong, and unfortunately this was a very, very clear example of how some of those ideas need to die.
Yeah, the quintessential white colonial taming of the savage character. Yep. Like that is who that character was. And to juxtapose, because the show does offer the opposite of that, where you have the character and the collector who is also a fuck up, but who is allowed the opportunity to grow
and to get it wrong, to accidentally cause harm in the process.
Yeah, and to mind you, they had done the same thing for Bellows time and time again throughout the show. So it's not like it was just a one and done thing. But this other character, who is also a villain in the show until the end, does demonstrate as a child character the ability to recognize harm and to immediately have the moment of realization of, ouch, I hurt that. And more significantly, to realize that in hurting them, I'm hurting myself, because I'm harming the relationship. And when you do harm to others, you're damaging the relationship, which can only serve to benefit you. Yeah. And that's and now I thought that they handled that really beautifully.
Yeah, and I think so when we're talking about what's the incentive? The incentive is being held in community. The incentive is having people who love you even though you're a fallible human being. We are all fallible human beings. We all make mistakes. We all grow through the mistakes that we make. But we have to be willing to do the work. And does that sound familiar? Do the work.
Do the work. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, feel free to share them with me via social media, email me at finloslives@gmail.com, or you can leave a voice message via the SpeakPipe app at finloslives.com. If you enjoyed this content, I hope you'll share the podcast. I look forward to our next conversation. So what are we talking about today?
Well, I was trying to think of a funny name for it. You wanted to call it the art of the fuck up.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, okay, so the F and the art, and I'm like, oh my god, that just spells fart.
It does spell fart.
It's just fart.
It's the art
It's
of the fart. Yeah, it's the art of the fart.
The art of the fuck up. It's fart.
Yes.